On the show today, we have guest Dr. Doug Bolton, who is a clinical psychologist, educator, and consultant who has spent his career at the intersection of mental health and education. After more than 20 years as a psychologist and principal at North Shore Academy, a therapeutic K-12 school in Illinois, he now serves as director of school consultation at Formative Psychological Services. Doug partners with schools, families, and clinicians across the country to reimagine how to leverage the power of school community to impact the mental health and engagement of both staff and students. He's the author of Untethered, Creating Connected Families, Schools, and Communities to Raise a Resilient Generation. Get ready for an exciting episode.
I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-created curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Doug Bolton, welcome to the Time for Teachership podcast.
Lindsay, it's so nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
I am so glad that we're both here at the same time talking about this. This is so important. And I am really excited because you talk about building resilience and building resilience in kids. I also think about how stressed out a lot of children now are. I mean, across the years, certainly, but I read The Anxious Generation. That's very top of mind for me as well. So I'm wondering, as we jump into the conversation today, is there something on your mind that you want to bring to the forefront or that people should just know as they engage with the episode?
Well, thank you. I think that the thing that strikes me the most as I think about this work and the crisis of resilience is it's not just kids who are struggling right now. The teachers, there's never been a time when teachers have been so stressed. Gallup found that K-12 teachers are the most stressed profession in America right now. And the Surgeon General recently released a advisory for parents that just being a parent puts you at risk for mental health problems. So I guess I want to say the whole system. I think kids are kind of downstream of a system that we've created that's stressing everyone out. And I guess that would be my hope, is to take a look at that whole system as we talk about this today.
That's a really good segue into my next question. So I think, Dr. Bettina Love talks about dreams grounded in the critique of injustice in terms of freedom dreaming. And I'm wondering, what is that dream you hold for young people, whether it's families, whether it's through the education system? What's that dream for you?
Yeah, and I love that quote. I've never heard that before. It's beautiful. I think my dream is that we can redefine what it means to be successful, and in doing so, recognize that our metrics for success, which has typically been achievement test scores, enrollment at a high achieving school, whatever that looks like, are things that have really, I think, been damaging to everybody in the system. The people who find it hard for them to reach those goals because their brain isn't suited to how we do education, and or the people who are really good at it, who then begin to define themselves by their achievement and not by who they are, and parents who begin to define themselves by how successful their kids are, educators who define themselves by how many of their students go on to highly selective schools. And so I guess what I would like to do, a lot of the research and reading I've been doing now has been really focused on how when we set a goal for something, when we say this is what we want, oftentimes in order to, I think they call it obliquity, which is this when you're seeking profit as an organization, you end up oftentimes tanking the organization. When you seek high quality products, the money comes, the money follows. But when we focus, so we've got to be careful what we focus on. And what the research has said all along is that when we invest in relationships in our relational lives, we're happier, we're healthier, we're more successful. Achievement comes easier. When we focus on achievement, all of a sudden those are the things that are the first things to go. And it's ended up with, I think, a whole system that is overly stressed. So did I answer the question with my dream? So my dream is we redefine what it means to be successful as a child. I think that would be what I would say.
I love that. And I love how you painted a nice holistic picture of how that touches everyone, right? And that touches everyone, all children, but all people involved in children's lives as well. And I love that dream. I know you mentioned a lot about the research, and I know you've been steeped in the research for writing your book, for just all that you do. And I'm curious, can you share, a little bit more about any of the research you've learned on, mental health? And like you talked about, all spectrums in terms of achievement from a school perspective of kids. Like, why is it so important that we take this seriously? Because a lot of times I think, even though people have that dream in the back of their mind, maybe that they're like, yeah, I want my kid to be really like mentally well and holistically well. However, I feel also this stress around schools and like I want them to be successful there. And there's this tug. So why is it important that we do focus on redefining that success?
Well, so it's an interesting thing. The research on attending a highly selective school does not suggest that people who attend highly selective schools are going to be any more successful in life. And so if we take a look at that research, for instance, kids don't learn more at a highly selective college. I'm from Illinois. You don't learn more if you go to a Northwestern versus a Northern Illinois. And there is one thing that determines how much someone learns in college, and it's not how selective or how highly achieving the college is. Do you know what that is?
No.
How much you study.
Oh, nice.
Right. So wherever you go, if you study and invest in it, you're going to learn. Right. In a lot of these highly selective schools, you are learning from teaching assistants and research assistants as much as you're doing anything. So that's one thing. Do you make more money? No, you don't make more money. They did some interesting research where they had, I don't know how they find this research, but they took a look at people who got into highly selective schools but couldn't go for one reason or another and ended up going to a less selective school, like near home or whatever, because they couldn't leave, versus people who did end up going to highly selective schools. And 10 years later, they were making there was no difference in the money. The interesting thing was that the people who went to the highly selective schools often felt underpaid. So the things that we think are the drivers of success are not the drivers of success, but they are the drivers of stress. And our desire to get kids into these highly selective schools, to get them into AP classes, to get them to believe that they've got to be in the top 10% of their class, worrying about homework, worrying about these grades, as if this is that they're either going to get or lose a ticket to success in life. None of that holds, and yet this is what drives so much of parent, teacher, and student stress and anxiety.
Wow, that was a really good synthesis of like why you shouldn't focus on this and why you should focus on this instead. Thank you. I love that you talked about investing in relationships a little while ago, and I would love if you could expand on that. Like, what is the kind of mental health value or the value in general of doing that, investing in relationships and community?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. There's a metaphor. It's a public health parable, actually, that I think is a metaphor for our mental health crisis today. And these two people are sitting by a river having a picnic, and they look up and there's a child in the river drowning, and they dive in and they get this child to safety, and they're exhausted, and they look up and there are two more kids in the water. They go back in and they get those kids to safety, and then they turn around and the river's filled with these kids who need their help. And one of them just dives in and starts pulling kids out of the river. And the other one goes up on shore. And the one in the water says, "What are you doing? I can't save these kids on my own." And the one on shore says, "I'm going upstream. We've got to figure out why these kids are falling in." And, when we take a look at what's upstream of mental health, what's upstream in resilience is our interpersonal connections and relationships. So a couple of things that are related and connected to this. First of all, when you're embedded in a belonging community, you're more motivated to learn. You perform better academically. You have better attendance. You're healthier. You have better mental health, right? All of the things that we worry most about. For the kids who are most stressed, it buffers the impact of stress and trauma. So if I was to look for a school now, it wouldn't be based on test scores. It would be based on where are the communities that are going to be healthiest, where my child can fully experience belonging. So that's one bit of research. And then the other is the grant study. And the grant study was done in Boston starting in 1938. And they took sophomores from Harvard. And then they wanted to expand it. So they had 200 sophomores from Harvard, but then they expanded it to people in Boston more generally, men in Boston more generally. So it was a male cohort of about 700 or 800 people. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to see what makes people happy and healthy in their lives. So this is a longitudinal study, one of the most famous longitudinal studies they have. They're still studying the people who are still alive. And John F. Kennedy was one of the people who was originally in the study. So they've got 80, 90 years of research now, and what they say is that if we take a look at what leads to health and happiness and success, it is not money. It is relationships. And that one of the people who ran the study for a while, George Valiant says, $20 million, 80 years of the grant study comes down to one 5-word conclusion. It is happiness is love, full stop. And so if we want our kids to be happy, if we want our kids to be well-adjusted, we invest in relationships because it's a false promise when we think that achievement or selection to a highly selective school is what's going to get us there.
I love that. It makes me think of just like the micro moves that I've been making as a parent lately to kind of make sense of current events or things like that. It can be really hard, particularly with my kid's almost 4 at this point. So it's hard to translate that. And I've been trying to be like, well, we believe that people are more important than money. And some people are making choices because they think money are more important than people.
Yeah.
And that's like one of the ways to grapple with this reality and this hard reality. But I love that it's backed up by science is actually, yes, people are more important than money to your happiness and well-being.
Exactly. And I think that one of the things that's really hard about what's happened in our school systems is it's everybody's drinking from the same water at some level. So at 4 years old, it's one challenge, but at 14 years old, it's another challenge. And at 24 years old, it's another challenge because in so many ways, and I think as a society, as a culture, things, K-12 education really began to change, I think, from in 2002 with the passage of No Child Left Behind. And really what No Child Left Behind, and I think it was well-meaning, it's saying we want people to achieve, right? And we want everybody to learn, and the goal, the way we decided to measure that was through test scores of high-pressure tests. And so teachers began to believe that this is how we define success and growth and learning. Kids started to believe that this is how we do it. Parents started to believe that this is how we do it. And so now we seek out those schools that are the highest achieving schools. And if you take a look at the research on high achieving schools, what you'll find, and this really came out in 2019, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation named the top environmental conditions harming adolescent wellness. And we knew the first 3: trauma, discrimination, poverty. But the 4th is this excessive pressure to excel. And so all of a sudden, people are mortgaging their homes to get their kids into these high achieving schools. And yet just being enrolled in a high achieving school puts you at risk 3 to 7 times higher for anxiety, depression, and substance use. And so, and we've got 25 years of research now on, okay, so did it move the dial? All this focus on test scores, all this anxiety we put on people, we must be learning more, right? And the fact is that our test scores have stayed flat. And so this idea that that this focus on achievement testing, it it undermines our mental health, and it doesn't work. And I just wonder, when is it that we're going to realize, and why would we develop a system and stay with a system where every stakeholder is experiencing significant stress, parents, teachers, and students, and yet we continue to grab onto this and say, no, we just need to come up with a new secret for how we get these test scores up, instead of saying, let's not look at test scores anymore. One last thing, I'm sorry, but but it's fascinating to me because you take a look, and 15 years ago, the head of HR at Google said, we are no longer looking at grades in our work. They say, because what he said was, it's when we look at grades, there's no correlation between success.
Hi, this is Leah popping in to share the free resource for this episode, Co-Creating Class Agreement Slide Deck. You can find it at the blog post for this episode, www.lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/260. Now back to the show.
So it's not showing up in business, because what happens is, what we do is we get people who are highly compliant, and the people who are highly compliant do well in our schools, but that's not what businesses are looking for, especially in this age of business and work. Is we want people to come in with new ideas and new solutions to problems, instead of just saying, tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Oh my gosh, that was a great synthesis of like why it is so important that we do things differently. And so now my questions are going to change to kind of, how do we do it? Like, do you have suggestions for teachers or families or both to kind of, I think you had talked about like positive stress in some of your work, I think I was reading, and to increase that positive stress, but decrease the toxic stress, to build that resilience up for kids.
Yeah. So there's a couple different things that show up for me. The first is a model that I talk about in my book. It's called the Circle of Courage, and it's actually born of Native American tradition. The research and the work of they had a group of 3 researchers, psychologists, and one of them grew up in the Lakota tradition, and he was able to say, the research we're coming up with about what are the qualities of a community that support resilience are the same things that were part of my tradition. So they call it the Circle of Courage. And what they talk about is that there are 4 main things that we need to experience from our community in order to be successful. And the first is a sense of belonging, that we matter, we feel cared for, we feel safe within this community. The second is mastery. And this is where kind of positive stress can come in, that we want kids to experience stress. That the only way for us to learn how to manage stress is to experience stress. And so we want to be able to have kids experience stress, that's essential. And I think that's one of the things I really like about the anxious generation, is it speaks to how we, and our protectiveness, kids don't learn how to cope with stress because we don't let them experience it. Adults swoop in too fast, right? And but mastery is getting better at something that's meaningful to me. And it allows me to then suffer setbacks and stay engaged, right? It's Csikszentmihalyi's kind of idea of flow, right? That's to me, that's kind of our mastery piece. The next is independence, this idea that I can set a goal and I've got the skills I need to be able to achieve it, and people aren't going to undermine my independence, right? They're going to support me in growing and making decisions and making mistakes that way and learning from those. And then the last is generosity. And I think about generosity in a couple of ways. One is that I've got gifts to give to the world, right? To recognize what those are and to then have the opportunity to share those gifts. And so when I think about the circle of courage, what I think about is when a child is struggling, I think, where's the circle broken? And then how can I, if it's if people are saying I'm lonely, or if there's bullying or being bullied, that's a belonging issue. And then let's get at belonging. If somebody's saying I'm bored or I'm overwhelmed, I can't do it, that's probably a mastery issue. If people are becoming defiant or too deferential, that's probably an independence issue. If people are feeling like they don't have anything to give to the world, there's that I'm useless or I'm worthless, then that's a generosity issue. And so that's one of the ways, that's one of the frames that I use to think about things. And then the other frame that I use is this idea that Ross Green talks about, and Bruce Perry, I'm sorry. Bruce Perry and his work, he's an expert in trauma, in childhood neuroscience, and what he says is that he calls it the 3 R's. We need to be emotionally regulated, and we need to be connected in relationship to access our full brains. And when we struggle to access our best brains, our best selves, it's generally because we're dysregulated and or we're feeling disconnected. And so the work in schools, I think, is to make sure that every class period we're giving time for kids to be emotionally regulate, to quiet that nervous system so that we can learn. And then the other is learning has always been social. And so how can I make sure that that we're learning together, that it's not sitting down and doing desk work, or that may be part of it, but making sure that in every classroom we're investing some time to emotionally regulate and to be connected in relationship.
I love these frameworks, and I can envision many situations where I've had a child in one of my classes or my own child like having difficulties with any of these things. And so I imagine, people who are engaging with this episode right now are also having those kids come to mind. Any advice you would have if you want to like take one of them, for instance, and say like, okay, someone is struggling with belonging or someone is struggling with dysregulation, like what's a move that a family member or a teacher could make once I hear like the diagnosis is kind of stage one, figure out where's this coming from, what's the issue, and then what do I do in response to it? Any advice?
Yeah, a couple of things. There's a guy named Stuart Shanker, psychologist in Canada, who I just love his work. And what he says is misbehavior is stress behavior. He wrote a book called Self-Reg that is a great book. And this has been really helpful for me as when I think about this, is that and this is true for me too, when there are times when I handle a really stressful situation beautifully, right? And then the same situation could happen tomorrow and I totally lose my cool. And it's not about the situation, it's about the stress that I'm bringing into the situation. And so the same is true for kids. And so the first step is not figuring out what can I do to change the behavior. It's, I wonder what the stress is. I wonder why this is stressful now. So that's one piece. The other piece that comes to mind is the idea of that Mary Jo Barrett, she's a social worker and an amazing thinker and practitioner in the world of supporting families who've experienced trauma. And she talks about the concept of pause and ponder. And so what she's able to talk about is that our lives have a rhythm, that our nervous systems have a rhythm, that we're constantly expanding and contracting, but in order to expand, in order to fully engage with the world, we need to quiet that nervous system first and give it a rest. And that when we're healthiest is there's this rhythm between, we get a good night's sleep, that's the contraction, and then we expand. If we're a student, we do our work day, we go to school, we do what we need to do, and then we rest at night so that we can then be our best selves. Same thing for us. We'd never say you've got an important meeting coming up, you should stay up all night working on the agenda, right? We'd say, no, because we know the idea is, and we want to make it predictable. so that our nervous system knows that this is coming. We play hard for a first half, but then we know that there's going to be halftime. We're going to be able to rest, and then we engage again. And so this idea of, she calls these downtimes pausing and pondering. And what happens, I think what's happening, people who experience stress, their nervous system never gets a break, right? Because their nervous system is constantly activated, being hypervigilant about what's happened and what could happen in the future. And when we push our kids, when we teach bell to bell, when we push our kids, and then they come home from school, they've got to do homework, and then they've got to go to their travel team practice, and then they've got to go to their tutoring, and then boom, 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 and that they're not getting those breaks. And as parents and as educators, when we're teaching bell to bell, and then we've got to get our 3 kids to their 3 travel teams, and of course, then we got to get them all to therapy because nobody's doing well. What I would say is what we need to do in our classrooms, what we need to do in our homes, is to build in these predictable times when our nervous systems can quiet. And that will mean that we can then engage better later on.
I love that. And I love that you're connecting that both to students or like the school setting, like with teachers planning bell to bell and not planning for that pause and ponder, as well as for families. And I just am reminded of like this week, I think I was saying to my kid, like, oh yeah, when I was in high school, I would have after school, like I would have practice or away games where I had to ride a bus for an hour and then play a game,
right,
and watch the other team play the game and then go home, and then I would go to sleep. And he's like, when did you have time to play? Like to just relax and play? And I was like, wow, that's exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly.
The wisdom of small children. I love it.
Yes, exactly.
And so I guess I think there's so much stuff, and I know people can read your book for more details on all of this. So there's so much that you talk about. And honestly, I've been taking so many notes. I have like a laundry list to read next now, books and research.
Yes.
But where would you encourage people to start? Like the first thing they do, they've engaged with the episode, they're really jazzed about some of this stuff. Like what's the first thing that they could put into action right away?
Yeah, I think that if we can, I would do the pausing and pondering. The thing that I think is most important, that's the regulate part of the R, right? Regulate and relate. I think that things like family dinners have become endangered species because we're so busy, and people will say, well, my kid wants to be a part of 3 travel teams, so I'm just doing what they want to do. But in the meantime, I'm stressed trying to take care of all these things, figure out, who needs helmets and who needs shin pads and who needs who forgot the bow for their violin, right? And do I have all the work to get from school to get to the tutor? All of these pieces, nobody's getting the breaks that they need. And so if I was to do anything, so what I would say to parents, they'd say, well, they want to be part of all these 3 teams. And I'd say, well, they probably also want 3 ice cream sundaes before dinner, right? And it's easy to say no to that, right? And yet I think that just because kids want it doesn't mean that it's healthy for them or for us. And I think I would say, how do we build in these pauses in our lives, in our family's life, in our kids' lives, before we build anything else in? And then figure out what we can add, but make sure that those are sacred. That would probably be the first thing that I would do, because I think that our nervous systems are under attack, and what we need to do is we need to protect those so that we can then show up as best we can as parents, so the kids can show up in a classroom on a good night's rest and not feeling so stressed. I wouldn't worry about things like homework. If they've got too much homework, kids in Finland, they have 2.9 hours of homework a week, and in America it's 2.7 hours a night. And Finland and the kids in Finland are doing a whole lot better on these standardized tests than we are. We should learn something from this, right? That this homework assignment isn't the end of the world. This C- is not the end of the world. That we're going to be okay. What we want to do is make sure the relationships are solid, and that we're getting breaks. And when we do that, we're going to have healthier kids.
I love that. I was just reminded of when I was a high school teacher, we would do this like plan out a little executive functioning, like plan out your day. Like when you get home, like what do you do? And, a lot of kids
Yeah,
would work after school and then they'd have to fit in homework. And if I could go back and redo that assignment, I'd be like, okay, and plan your pauses, like plan your, right?
exactly.
That would
Yes,
be cool.
let's put those in first, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I'm very inspired by all this. I'm sure you seem like a person who is constantly learning. You're constantly referencing like research.
That's the thing is I love the learning part of this. Yeah.
I was going to ask, what are you learning about lately? Like what's new and exciting on your mind?
The thing that I mentioned it earlier is this idea that when we hit a target, when we shoot for a target, that like sales, like this idea of high achievement, what happens is when we focus on that, we undermine all the things that can lead to that. And so what I would say is, how can we focus on helping kids be engaged in school instead of helping them get good grades? I would think about how can we help. I think that we've gotten very good. Our focus, it used to be let's focus on how do we develop kids, and now we're focused on how do we develop data. And as a result, we're not getting as good data, and our kids are not developing in the way they need to. And so I would say, how can we shift that? And I'm fascinated by all of the examples. In Boeing, at Boeing they used to be let's just make really cool airplanes, and as a result they got all these profits, and then they had a CEO come in and say we're going to be profit focused, and all of a sudden we've been seeing more and more problems with the safety and the design and everything else of these planes, because when we build a plane to make profit, it's very different than we build a plane so that it's going to be the coolest plane we can build and answer a certain problem in the world, right? And so that's the research I've been doing, is just trying to better understand that, because I think that that's happening in our parenting and happening in our with our kids and in our parenting and in our schools.
I love that example. Thank you for making that come to life for us. And finally, where can people connect with you or learn more about you?
Yeah, so I've got a website, drddougbolton.com, drddougbolton.com, Bolton. And you can get my book. And my book tells a lot of stories about my work as a therapeutic school principal and psychologist. And the thing I love about the books is that I feel like the students are telling the stories, and I tell stories about my own family and mostly my struggles as a parent and what I've learned from those as well. So I think that my book would be one way, and I think my website's another way to kind of get a picture of the work that I'm doing. So.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bolton. This was such a humbling, amazing conversation. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Lindsay, thanks so much. I've loved it. I feel like we could have talked for ages. So thank you so much for what a great interview, and I'm just so grateful for your time and your energy and what you're bringing to the world. So thank you for letting me be a part of it.
Absolutely.
If you're looking for support to help you talk to your child about history, current events, or other high emotion topics, we've got you. Families are now welcome to join EduBoost. Here's how it works. Your kid brings up a topic and you're not sure what to say next, or something happens in the world or in your kid's life and you want to talk to your kid about it, but you're unsure how to bring it up. Immediately, you send us a message on Slack telling us what's going on via text or audio message. Slack can be used on your phone as well as your computer, so you can totally message us from the grocery store checkout line or at 2 a.m. when the question's literally keeping you awake at night. You get a personalized response and any relevant resources within 24 hours from me or my awesome colleague, Cara Prenikoff. Visit lindsaybethlyons.com/families for more information on family coaching.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.